Okay, so today I want to talk about poetry analysis. I know many of you have been asking questions about what you can be writing about in your responses for your poetry anthology, and this is a method that we can definitely use to work through the poetry, make some comments, look at it insightfully, and then also use it to work into a paragraph for a response. So we're going to use a method called Tpcastt. Tpcastt is a process to help you organize your analysis of a poem. As you can see, it's an acronym. So what it means is that each letter stands for something different that we're going to analyze. So I'm going to go through that with you. We're going to be using the poem "The Road Not Taken" by Robert Frost as we kind of go through this. So basically what you see is that Tpcastt is an acronym that stands for title, paraphrase, connotation, attitude, shifts, titles, and theme. So what we want to do as we go through the poem is we want to be on the lookout for these things, and also we want to go in order because it kind of helps with the analysis. So let's start at the very beginning. Okay, so the first T is for title. So obviously we've talked about this before. What we always want to do, especially with poetry, is we want to analyze the title first. So if we take a look at the title, "The Road Not Taken," what predictions can we make about the poem? What words jump out at us? What might be relevant to the overall understanding or the meaning of the poem? Basically speaking, what do we think this poem is going to be about? What words or phrases in the title lead us to that? Is there anything that means something in a deeper sense? So just keep that in mind as you go through the title. So the first thing we obviously want to do is we want to read the poem. Okay, so what we're going to do right now is I'm going to go through and read this to you quickly, right? This is a really famous poem written by an American author called Robert Frost. Robert Frost, much like Billy Collins, is a very famous American poet. So if you have any time or you're looking for a poet for your poetry anthology, I would highly recommend some Robert Frost. This is probably his most famous poem, called "The Road Not Taken." So let's go ahead and read this. "The Road Not Taken" by Robert Frost. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both. And be one traveler long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear, though as for that the passing there had worn them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay, and leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. So the rest of this will kind of show you how we can use parts of the Tpcastt to sift through this poem and make some comments and some thoughts about it. Okay. The second letter is P. The P is for paraphrasing. Again, we've talked about this before with our sonnets, that paraphrasing is putting something in your own words. So after reading the poem, rewrite it in your own words. Rephrase the poem using the same number of lines in the original poem as much as the paraphrase will allow. So this is really important in kind of putting things in your own words and helping with the analysis part. You should not be including a paraphrase in your paragraph for your anthology, though. So if you're using Tpcastt, skip the P for the poetry anthology, but for this assignment and also for the analysis of poetry moving forward, make sure you're always paraphrasing. It just helps kind of understanding things. Okay, so when we look at this, this is a paraphrased version, just quickly, of the first couple stanzas here. So, two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both. This person paraphrased it into the following. Two roads separated in a yellow forest, and I felt disappointed that I could not travel both. I stood for a while and thought. I looked as far as I could see, to the point that I could see no longer. Finally, I made a choice because it looked better than the others, also because it was grassier, and it seemed that not so many people had chosen this way, but eventually they would be the same. So you can kind of see how this is being worked into their own. Here's the last two. They were the same in the morning, and seemed like nobody passed there. I will keep the other road in mind for another day, but because I didn't know where I was going, I didn't think I would ever come back. And someday I will be telling this story with a regret that there were two roads separated in the forest, and I took the one people didn't go on, and it's made all the difference. So this is how that person's kind of paraphrased things and put things into your own words. Definitely make sure you're doing that. The C then is for connotation. Okay, connotation is basically meaning the deeper meaning. Usually connotation refers to the word choice. Sort of, are the words emotional? Are they maybe words that have different meanings. But connotation can also refer to figures of speech like metaphors and similes. They can also refer to sound effects, things like alliteration, or maybe even something like rhyme, and how they contribute to the meaning of the poem. And then there are also other devices, things like hyperboles. Symbolism is really big in connotation, so I would challenge you to look at symbolism, and be on the lookout for it. If you see any symbols in the poem, what might they mean, and how are they working in the poem? Okay, so when we take a look at the connotation of it, we see that there's some poetic devices that are being used in this poem, in particular, metaphors and symbolism. So the metaphors, they're referring to roads, which refer to paths of life, and travelers is referring to a person who grows up and is experiencing life. The other thing that's really interesting in here, there's other symbols than just this one, but is the symbolism of the yellow. So the yellow coloring of the woods is a light color, which we know from Romeo and Juliet means a lot of things, but it represents the idea of light and hope and promise that the speaker is standing in a situation that's going to offer him a bright future. Though both paths are equally lit, he can only choose one, so he chooses the one that he thinks is best for him. Also, the woods is a metaphor. It's also symbolic. The poem is set in the woods because we get an image of a quiet, deserted place. The speaker is left alone to decide. It's completely up to them. There's no road signs. There's no people to stop, ask for directions. Just like in life, there's really no designed, path. There's also people who do try to help us, but ultimately the decisions that we make in life come down to us. So we see that the connotation part of it, different devices are being used like metaphors and symbolism. I would also look at things like the rhyme of this poem and also some of the other sound devices. Okay. Roads are also very symbolic here. Again, we don't just arrive at a location, it's also a destination. Every road leads to a place. And we think about life, every path or every decision that we make in life leads us down a certain path. So you can kind of see how the connotation of the piece really works. The morning is also symbolic. Again, with morning comes light, and with light comes truth. It also represents the idea of new beginnings and endless possibilities. So Frost sets the poem in the morning to reveal that the speaker might be in the early years of their life and has this whole life sort of spread out before them. Okay, there's a little bit of the rhyme scheme. A, B, A, A, B, so slightly different than the Shakespearean sonnet. But you can see how that kind of creates this rhythm and flow to the piece, which is quite interesting. Okay, so C is for connotation. Look for those deeper things. Look for those poetic devices. Okay, A is for attitude. Okay, so much like the volta in a sonnet, does this ever change? So does the attitude of the piece ever change? So I always say that we should be looking at the words and the details to decide on the speaker's attitude. So at the beginning of this poem, what is the speaker's attitude towards what's happening, this decision that they're making? And then later on, does that change, right? So does it change from the beginning to the end? And if it does, as we note from the Shakespearean sonnet, that's called a volta. So be on the lookout for the volta. So at the beginning of the poem, right, what we see is that it's very reflective, very nostalgic. It's almost like it's a flashback because of past tense verbs. They're patient, but they're also sort of anxious about the decision that they're going to make, right? And then in line 16, which is a really interesting line, we see that they're going to tell the story with a sigh, and a sigh is often it's either something that has to deal with the relief or the regret. So that's a question of, is this a poem that has a little bit of relief to it or a little bit of regret to it? Okay. S is for shift. Again, very similar to volta. So be on the lookout for a volta, just like an attitude. Shift can also be a shift in time, a shift in a different speaker. Some poems use more than just one shift, but usually there is at least one. So be on the lookout for that. And again, in this case, we can see a couple things here that in certain lines there's dark imagery, and then there's light imagery later on, or the mood seems to be a little bit slower, but then it's faster. And then there's decisions, and then there's also line 15 and 16 where the poem was written in the past but then jumps forward, and there's this idea of maybe going from this at first a very happy decision, but then later on this regret. So shift, it would be more of a volta or a shift in time, or maybe even a shift in who's telling the poem. And then the next thing we want to do is we want to take a look at the title again. So at this time, you should really reconsider the title. The title is huge in every poem, I think. So first of all, were you right in your predictions on what you thought the poem would be about? But then the other thing is, what other meanings might the title have in light of the analysis that you've just done? So now that you've kind of read through the poem and you've tried to understand it more, how does the title of the poem represent the meaning of the poem? So we want to be a little bit more interpretive here, not necessarily guessing and making predictions, but really trying to unpack what the title means, right? And how it relates to the overall meaning of the poem. So just reconsider it. So again, initially, right, the title might lead us to think that the speaker is going to, reflect on a path that he chose, right? That this is going to be a poem simply about just two roads, right? Or a road that they decided not to take. But what we see is that this could be again a poem about regret, right? Or that he ultimately seems satisfied with the choice. Okay, so again, it's not just a poem about a road not taken. It could be about a path or a choice or a life destination that they're either happy or not happy about. So it gets a little bit deeper when you reconsider the title again. Okay, and then the last thing, which is what we always want to do, we already know this, is that we want to look out for the theme. So what is the universal observation about life that the author is making in this poem? Right? Again, this is something that's universally true to life and to the human condition, right? So again, look at the parts of the Tpcastt. Look at the connotation, look at the shift, look at the attitude. How are these all working together to convey a thematic idea, right? The road not taken is really a poem about what? So maybe it's a poem about choices, or maybe it's a poem about regret, or maybe it's a poem about differences. Okay, and then again, the big question is, what is the poet trying to say about those big ideas? Okay, so does this poem perhaps celebrate the choices that we have in life, right? Or is this a poem about considering choices before we make decisions? Because often when we make those decisions, there's no turning back. Does this encourage people, or does this comment on how the decisions that we make for ourselves, right, should be more important sometimes than the decisions that we make for others, right? And then here's a great theme, that the best choice may often lie in the one less chosen by others. That's a theme statement. That's a great observation, right? I argue that this poem is actually a poem about regret, and that they are looking back on the decisions they made and kind of saying, man, even though life was great, I wonder what it would have been like if I would have taken the other path, which is why they sigh and which is why they regret. Remember, the title is The Road Not Taken, not The Road Taken. So I often tend to lean towards the fact that the poem might be about regret. So really, what's the universal observation about life? What's the thematic ideas? And then from there, write that theme statement. Use that half sheet of paper, right, that we've done throughout the year to figure out the thematic statement that you want to write. So Tpcastt is a great method, right? Make sure you do check out the assignment. So the assignment for tonight is going to be to choose any poem from Poetry 180 and complete the questions below. So I've kind of taken some of the PowerPoint and put it into this document here for you. So make a copy of this document, and then you can put your answers in here as you go through and think about the poem that you want to discuss from Poetry 180. Again, as always, have any questions, reach out, let me know. If I can help, I'd love to. And again, if you look at these different parts of the Tpcastt, we can now start pulling these out and putting them into a paragraph and using these then for our analysis, our responses for the poetry anthology. So you'll see how this is going to work with the next assignment that we give you, which will branch off of this. So again, best of luck. If you have any questions, let me know. Shoot me an email, whatever you need. Thanks.